comfort can afford. Driving along to face temptation's door. Where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go? Where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul. Needing a friend to help me in the end. Where could I go but to the Lord? Life here is grand with friends I love so dear. Comfort I get from God's own word. Yes, when I face the chilling hands of death, where could I go but to the Lord? Where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul. Needing a friend to help me in the end. Where could I go but to the Lord?
And time for me will be no more. I wanna dwell with all the saved. I wanna live beyond the grave. When death is come, and I must go from this vain world of sin below. I will be one among the saved. I wanna live beyond the grave. I'm trusting in His holy word, believing He my soul is saved. I wanna live beyond the grave. When death is come, and I must go from this vain world of sin below. I will be one among the saved. I wanna live beyond the grave. I'm happy in my Savior's love. He sent me from His throne above. I found sweet peace I longly crave. I wanna live beyond the grave. When death is come, and I must go from this vain world of sin below. I will be one among the saved. I wanna live beyond the grave. I wanna live beyond the grave.
The shadows of sin have filled your world with darkness. A heavy burden of guilt is on your breast. Your hungry soul cries out for fulfillment. Long you have searched in vain for peace and rest. So lift your hand up to the Savior. Without Jesus, there's no hope for tomorrow. There is no meaning in yesterday. You've struggled alone, now you're so tired and weary. You've had all the pain you can take. So lift your hand up to the Savior. He's reaching down to pick you up. Open your eyes to the light of the sun and be healed in the warmth of His love. Open your ears and you will hear the voice of Jesus. He's calling now, oh sinner, come. He's calling now, oh sinner, come.
Heaven is worth it all.
Friends, I'd like to tell you a story that we heard a preacher tell in one of our meetings. This is a true story. He said his pastor was one of the most godly men, one of the best pastors a man could ever have. He said he would visit the sick. He was a wonderful preacher. And then he'd go out through the week and he would help get children into Sunday school. He'd make a bus route. And he said one Saturday, he and his pastor were together, and they'd gone out into the country where there wasn't any churches. And they saw a house alongside the road. Out in the yard were several little children. He said, my pastor said, let's stop and see if these children go to church. And he said, we walked down to the yard, and he said, the oldest little girl, he said to her, honey, do you go to church? And she said, no, sir. Well, he said, I'm a pastor of a certain church, and told her where it was located. And he said, if your mom and daddy would let you, would you like to come to my church if we'd come by here and get you on Sunday morning? And she said, yes, sir, if they'll let us. He said, where is your mom and daddy? And she hung her little head and she said, well, mister, she said, my daddy is in jail. He's an alcoholic. But he said, my mama's down at the house. And he said, they started towards the house. The preacher felt someone get a hold of his coattail. And he turned around, there stood a little boy. Just a little fella about 6 or 7 years old. And he looked at the preacher with a big smile on his face. And he held up his little hand and he said, hi, me, Charlie. The preacher said a few words to him, and they went on down to the house, and they started to knock on the door, but the door was open a little bit, and they looked into the living room, and there sat a drunken mother with a bottle of whiskey in her hand. She had drank about half of it, and they got her attention, and she asked them in, and the best they could, they got permission for the children to come to Sunday school and church the next day. The next day they drove up. The driver said there stood 6 children waiting for the bus. They got on the bus, and finally the last little boy got on, and he looked at the driver. He held up his little hand with a big smile on his face, and he said, me, Charlie. Every day, every Sunday, they would be waiting for the bus. He said we had a 2 weeks revival meeting, and they never missed a service. But he said the best part of it, all 6 of them were saved during our revival meeting. But he said one day my pastor was sitting in his study there at the church office. The telephone rang, and somebody on the other end said, "Preacher, hurry to the Baptist hospital. Little Charlie has been hit by a car." Of course, the preacher rushed to the hospital as soon as he could, and when he got there lay a little boy, unconscious, bloody. The preacher looked at him and bowed his head and prayed. And the little fellow moved and came to himself, and he looked up at the preacher. He was too weak to raise his hand, but he could still smile. And he smiled great big, and he said, me, Charlie. And then he died. The preacher said a couple of days later, I stood over a little casket of a little boy, and I tried to preach his funeral. But he said when I was preaching his funeral, my mind wasn't on the funeral. He said my mind started to wondering, and I got to thinking about the day that little Charlie died there in the hospital. I got to thinking about the day that the angels of the Lord came. And he